President Trump delivering a gripping account of a high-stakes rescue mission he authorized. A U.S. airman stuck behind enemy lines for almost 48 hours until a massive operation involving the CIA, SEAL Team 6, and more than 150 aircraft showcased a striking display of U.S. military power and precision.
In the United States military, we leave no American behind. He was injured quite badly and stranded in an area teeming with terrorists from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He scaled cliff faces, bleeding rather profusely, treated his own wounds, and contacted American forces to transmit his location. They came in so fast and so hard, and these guys knew exactly what to do. Let's go, come on, get in, let's go, blah. They came one right after another.
President Trump then sparring with the press in his usual off-the-cuff style. Listen to how he responded when asked about his threat to bomb Iran's power plants and bridges if a deal is not struck by 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow.
Are you concerned that your threat to bomb power plants and bridges amount to
No, not at all. No, I'm not. I hope I don't have to do it.
Are you winding this down?
Can't tell you.
Are you escalating
I can't tell you. I don't know. I can't tell you. Depends what they do. They're very good artists. That's why for 47 years they've been other presidents, and they haven't done the job.
You called the Iranians crazy bastards.
True.
What is your response to critics who say that...
I don't care about critics. We have 45,000 soldiers in South Korea to protect us from Kim Jong-un. He said very nice things about me. He used to call Joe Biden a mentally person.
And those comments and Trump's language yesterday are sure to make a stir. Take a look at the reaction to a Truth Social post where the president told Iran to open the effing strait.
If your children are watching, be warned, the president did not use polite language. Open the strait, you crazy bastards.
It's becoming increasingly clear that Donald Trump is not mentally well.
This was an outrageous Easter morning post. Again, on the most blessed holiday for Christians across the globe.
They don't care about God and Jesus on Easter Sunday. This is what your president. I don't.
Donald Trump chose Easter Sunday to reveal the fullest portrait to date of his instability and lack of self-regulation and self-control.
Well, Jesse, that is different from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who looked into the camera and said, don't.
Yeah, Democrats calling Trump crazy helps Trump. It makes him look like he's this madman who's totally unrestrained and unwilling or willing to do anything to win the war. So the Iranians look at that and they go, uh-oh, we better sign something. This guy's really willing to do it all. But I didn't think his tweets were any more bombastic than they usually are. And bombing power plants is not a war crime. Bill Clinton destroyed Serbia's entire energy infrastructure. Both Bushes took out Iraq's electricity grid. Rolling Thunder, North Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson took out the power plants. You do it under the laws of warfare, proportionality, dual-use systems. It can be done humanely. But this search and rescue mission, Dana, was the defining moment of the war. And it cements American momentum going into Tuesday's deadline and hopefully gives us an upper hand in these negotiations so we can get a ceasefire on our terms. This could have been a second Iranian hostage crisis. They could have paraded these airmen on television. It would have made us look not as superior as we appeared to be, and it could have given them a huge bargaining chip in peace talks. And all of that now has evaporated. They are just watching that slip away. And now you see this great push for more traffic through the strait. Iraqi oil tankers are getting through there. And it looks like these peace talks have legs. Think about it. We went in there, set up a forward operating base deep inside enemy territory, and got out with absolutely no casualties. The Iranians tried to form some national search party to go get these guys. That never happened. They were impotent, humiliated, and embarrassed, as the Joint Chiefs said. And hopefully this is the kind of moment that turns the war in our direction, as it already was.
Well, and we know, Kellyanne, what Iran and the proxies that it supports, like Hamas, like to do with hostages.
Yes.
And when President Trump said we aren't going to leave anyone behind, that is what separates us from others.
It's what should separate the United States, Dana, from everyone else, no matter who the president is. But we clearly know who's in charge now. Look, President Trump cannot be more transparent. He addressed us in prime time on Wednesday Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern, he's back in the White House press briefing room, and he brings with him General Kane and John Radcliffe, the head of the CIA, who brought us, he just gave us the full narrative of what had happened. Obviously, Iran was humiliated by it. These aren't empty threats by President Trump. He's actually forecasting to Iran a way out. Negotiate, capitulate, it's your choice. But he's setting the terms. 155 aircraft going there to rescue. And I just can't help but feel, Dana, I don't want to feel this way, but there's no other way to feel. So many people in our press, so many people in the Democratic Party are rooting for us to fail. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if we can't rescue him? What if he's dead? Isn't this Trump's fault? I've got to say, in the first term there for 4 years, you know how this is. They made us deal in so many hypotheticals, constantly hypothetical. What about this? What about that? What about that? What about this? What if Donald Trump takes the wings off of butterflies? Should we have the butterfly on CNN tonight at 9? Ask them how it feels. They never deal with it than the actual. They don't give enough coverage to what actually happened. So the president's out there saying, I don't care about the critics. I'm going to tell us all what happened. I think what he said last week was so important, too, when he reminded us all, Vietnam, 19 years. Iraq, 7 or 8 years. World War II, Korea, 3 years. He said 4 to 6 weeks, we're on track. And when something happens that we weren't expecting, like friendly fire or a mistaken, and now this, our airmen having to discharge from the aircraft, he deals with that too. But he brings us along, and we should all be happy about that. I went to the Easter egg roll today. I heard him. He is funny. We'll talk about that later, perhaps. But what struck me most is he started the entire thing out by doing two things. He said, today is about Christ, it's about religion, it's about celebration, renewal, and then he told everybody what's happening in Iran. This is American might. It's why the people who said defund the police, the adjunct to that is really don't respect and don't resource our military. Donald Trump gave the military its first major pay raise in 10 years in the first term, and ever since then, he has shown a contrast with the defund the police, disrespect the military party. We now have one party that could have pulled this off.
And Kat, one of the things that he said last Wednesday night that got some attention was that the Strait of Hormuz will reopen naturally when this is over. But the deadline is about opening the Strait of Hormuz. And he doesn't want the lunatics to hold the world hostage when it comes to oil.
Right, yes. I mean, with the very strongly worded tweet. I mean, if I posted something like that, I do feel like people at this table would hold an intervention for me. Like, I feel...
I'll come find you.
And I don't have a problem with the F word. Personally, seeing so many people on the right say they're okay with the F word now opens up a lot of opportunities for me personally. So I actually love to see that. But I don't think it was just the F word that people were upset about. Some people think it doesn't sound like strength so much as escalation, right? And Donald Trump did win the election from support from a lot of people who were non-interventionists. So they were sick of these forever wars. They didn't want involvement in Iran. So if they hear about bridges and they hear about power plants, whether there's the F word there or not, then they're going to think that that sounds a little bit like escalation, which doesn't necessarily make them soft or liberals. It is different, Kellyanne, from I think that there are people certainly who they are wrapped up in they don't like Donald Trump, and it can feel like they're rooting against the United States, which is wrong, but it does not apply to everyone. And I think that's an important part of this conversation to distinguish. It doesn't make you anything other than what you've always been, which is a non-interventionist, if you are one of those people. People can believe any collection of things they want to believe. They can be liberal, they can be conservative, they can be independent like I am, and absolutely detest the Iranian regime, and still be concerned when rhetoric starts sounding like escalation, when what you want to see is the opposite of that.
And you imagine being, Greg, the two things I wanted to ask you. Waking up on Sunday morning and not feeling amazed by the United States military and their capabilities. And the second thing is, how many children are watching CNN?
It is the #1 show among infants.
My baby loves it.
Yeah, exactly.
Starts crying till I put it on, yeah.
I love the contrast between basic people who've been around for the last 10 years and the media. It's a far greater threat to hear an F-bomb than to face a nuclear bomb to them. The greater import is always with words and not deeds. So you have the military rescues, literally one of their own, but we need to be rescued from Trump's words because they're so harmful. especially to children. People telling us, protect the children, the same people that were pushing gender mutilation and drag queens at Story Hour and all that. I think Jesse's right about pretending to be crazy. I will take crazy over a cuck any day. And the Democrat Party is a party of cucks. Losers can sit and watch their country get screwed over and over again. And this guy, he says, you know what? Maybe if I act a little crazy, that's going to stop. I like to think about rescues in general. Who do you rescue and from what? Under Trump, we spared no expense in rescuing this serviceman. But under Biden, who did they rescue? They were trying to rescue America from its own military, because it was a bastion of bigotry and hate. So the rescue was turned inward. It was about language, words, pronouns that you needed to be saved from. What a change we're experiencing. Who would the Dems choose to save? Who have they saved? I remember the Dear Brittany Griner. Wasn't that a great save?
I just wrote that down for you.
But if you got to ask them, who would you save? A girl in her locker room or the man in a dress shaving his private parts next to her? We know that answer because they boasted about it. Or a woman at risk for rape or murder, or the criminal illegal who is here and has a penchant for such mayhem. We know that. They called them sanctuary cities. So they even refused to save us from Joe Biden, right? They knew he was done, and they let him rule the country, run the country, even until Election Day when he should have resigned. Once they knew he wasn't capable, he should have gone. The great thing also about this rescue is we have no idea what the racial or political makeup is of the people who did the rescuing. For all we know, they could be trans. But it doesn't matter. They were successful. The reason why they were successful is they weren't splintered into competing identity groups, which you can't really do in the military. And the only way you can win is if you get rid of this hierarchy of the oppressed, which you saw in corporations, which we're getting rid of. But in the military, you take orders from whoever they are, no matter what they look like. So it felt great. And, in war, you have these gaps of uncertainty and you fill them with hope. There are people whose baseline is Trump derangement, and they fill that uncertainty with pessimism. And they are bummed when it turns out that their own assumptions about the world do not turn out the way they are.
It is remarkable you were able to work trans into that story.
Twice even.
Tomorrow, if this story continues, I want the producers to put together a montage. Remember when all of the Democrats, right after President Trump got inaugurated the second time, and they did all those videos saying the F word?
Yes.
Remember that? And the thing is, it seemed offensive because they didn't mean it.
Yeah.
He actually means it.
Yeah, he's really good with the F word.
For some people, it wasn't about the F word, though. It was more about the blowing up bridges.
Yes, I still want to do the montage. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.